Hey everyone, welcome to the human side of hospitals. I'm so glad you are here. And now on this channel, we don't just talk about medicine, we listen to real people, to patients, to doctors, nurses, caregivers, anyone who has an unforgettable hospital experience. The hospitals can be places of healing, hope, sometimes even heartbreak, and every story has something to teach us. That is why I'm starting this, just to give people a space to share, to be heard, and to remind us that behind every hospital wall are human beings with stories worth telling. Now, here's where you come in. So, if you've ever been a patient, if you've worked in a hospital, or if you've supported a loved one through their hospital journey, I would love to hear from you. And you can send me a short video, audio, just write your story down. Or if you would like to sit and chat with me, you can join me live on Zoom. And all you have to do is just fill the form in the description below, or you can send me an email. And it doesn't matter where you are from, who you are, or whatsoever. You are welcome wherever part of the world you come from. And before we dive in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn the notification bell. Basically, not to miss these incredible voices from around the world. And a quick disclaimer before we start: these stories, their personal stories, shared with full consent, and we are here just to inspire, educate, and raise awareness. One thing is those who want to remain anonymous online. Well, for the sake of confidentiality and privacy, altered some of their voices into AI voices. And note that even the advice shared in these videos or in these experiences, they are not a substitute for medical advice. Always remember this. And if you have health concerns, always speak to a qualified healthcare professional. All right, let's dive into today's story.
I'm Trevor Blackwood, and I was a registered nurse in the emergency department at Mercy General Hospital in Portland, Oregon. Or at least I was until I submitted my resignation last month after what can only be described as the most disturbing week of my 15-year medical career. I'd been working emergency medicine since graduating from Oregon Health and Science University's Accelerated BSN program in 2009. After completing my specialty certification in emergency nursing and trauma care, I'd seen everything you could imagine in an ER: multiple gunshot wounds, severe burns, cardiac arrests, overdoses, psychiatric breaks, and trauma cases that would make seasoned paramedics lose their lunch. I'd worked level 1 trauma centers in Chicago and Denver before settling at Mercy General, drawn by their reputation for handling the most complex cases in the Pacific Northwest. Mercy General's emergency department operates as a 40-bed facility with separate trauma bays, pediatric units, and psychiatric holds. We typically see between 180 and 220 patients per day, with our busiest shifts running from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., when the combination of accidents, violence, and substance abuse cases peak. The facility employs 12 attending physicians, 36 registered nurses, and maintains partnerships with every major specialty service in the region. I'd been proud to work there, confident in my skills and absolutely certain that modern medicine could explain virtually any condition that walked through our doors. But what I'm about to tell you is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about human physiology and ultimately led me to leave the profession entirely. It started on Tuesday, October 3rd, 2023, during what should have been a routine night shift. I'd clocked in at 6:47 p.m., received report from the day nurse, and begun my rounds through the department. The census was typical for a weeknight. 23 patients, including 2 cardiac monitors, 1 psychiatric hold, and several minor trauma cases from a multi-vehicle accident on I-84. Dr. Rebecca Hartwell was the attending physician, someone I'd worked with dozens of times and respected for her diagnostic accuracy and calm demeanor under pressure. At 9:23 p.m., the ambulance bay doors opened and paramedics wheeled in what appeared to be a straightforward case. The patient was a Caucasian male, approximately 35 years old, found unconscious in Powell Butte Nature Preserve by hikers who called 911. Paramedic Jennifer Walsh gave me the report as they transferred him to bed 7. No identification, no obvious trauma. Vital signs stable but slightly elevated. Blood pressure 140/90, pulse 95, respirations 18, temperature 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Glasgow Coma Scale of 14. He was conscious but disoriented, responding to voice but not following complex commands. What struck me immediately was how ordinary he looked. Average height, maybe 5'10", medium build, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that appeared clean despite being found in a wooded area. His hair was brown, slightly unkempt, and he had no visible injuries, scars, or tattoos. No wallet, no phone, no identification of any kind. The only unusual detail was his shoes. Expensive-looking leather dress shoes that seemed completely inappropriate for hiking in Powell Butte's muddy trails. Dr. Hartwell ordered the standard workup. Complete blood count, comprehensive metabolic panel, urinalysis, chest x-ray, and CT scan of the head to rule out trauma or intracranial pathology. I drew the blood samples myself, noting that his veins were easy to find, and his blood flowed normally into the tubes. His skin felt normal temperature, maybe slightly cool to the touch, but nothing that raised any immediate concerns. The first indication that something was wrong came when I tried to take his blood pressure manually to verify the automated reading. I wrapped the cuff around his left arm, pumped it to 160 mean, and began to slowly release the pressure while listening through my stethoscope. What I heard made me pause and repeat the procedure 3 times. Instead of the typical lub-dub pattern of a heartbeat, I was hearing what sounded like a double beat with every cardiac cycle. Not the pathological gallop rhythm that indicates heart failure, but something I'd never encountered in 15 years of nursing. I called Dr. Hartwell over to listen. She frowned, took her own stethoscope, and spent nearly 5 minutes auscultating different areas of his chest. When she looked up, her expression was puzzled but not alarmed. "Unusual rhythm," she said, "but his heart rate and blood pressure are stable. Let's see what the EKG shows." I attached the 12-lead electrocardiogram, ensuring proper placement of each electrode according to standard protocol. The machine ran its analysis and printed out what appeared to be a completely normal sinus rhythm. Normal P waves, normal QRS complexes, normal T waves. Heart rate 94 beats per minute. But when I listened again with my stethoscope, I was still hearing that distinctive double beat that didn't correspond to what the EKG was recording. Dr. Hartwell listened again and shook her head. "The monitor shows normal rhythm, but I'm definitely hearing something unusual. Let's run a more extensive cardiac workup and see what the lab results show." At 10:45 p.m., the laboratory results arrived, and they raised more questions than they answered. His complete blood count showed normal red and white cell counts, normal hemoglobin and hematocrit. But his blood chemistry was bizarre. His glucose level was 127 mg DL, slightly elevated but not concerning. His electrolytes were perfectly balanced, but his lactate level, which should normally be between 0.5 and 2.0 mmol, was reading at 0.1 mmol. I'd never seen a lactate level that low in a conscious patient. Lactate is produced by cellular metabolism, and levels that low typically indicate either laboratory error or severe metabolic dysfunction. I called the lab to question the result. The technician, someone I'd worked with for years, insisted the sample had been run twice with identical results. "I've never seen anything like it," she told me. "His blood chemistry is almost too perfect. Everything's at the absolute optimal level." The chest x-ray was normal. The CT scan showed no signs of trauma, tumor, or abnormality. But Dr. Hartwell pointed out something strange in the images. The patient's lung capacity appeared significantly larger than normal for someone of his size. The radiologist, Dr. Chen, initially attributed this to good physical fitness, but when pressed, admitted the lung volumes were at the extreme upper limit of what he'd consider physiologically possible. By midnight, we had a patient who appeared completely healthy by every objective measure, yet was exhibiting symptoms and test results that didn't align with standard medical understanding. He remained conscious but disoriented, speaking in short sentences but unable to provide any information about his identity or how he'd ended up in the nature preserve. When asked his name, he would simply stare blankly. When asked where he lived, he'd shake his head as if he didn't understand the question. The strangest part was his behavior during the examination. Most patients who wake up in an emergency department are anxious, confused, or demanding answers. This man was completely calm, almost unnaturally so. He submitted to every procedure without resistance, never asked questions about what we were doing, and showed no emotional response to anything happening around him. It wasn't the flat affect of depression or psychiatric illness. It was more like he was observing everything with detached curiosity, as if he'd never experienced a medical examination before. At 12:30 a.m., I was checking his vital signs again when something happened that I still can't explain. I was taking his pulse manually, counting beats for a full minute to verify the accuracy of the cardiac monitor. As I pressed my fingers against the radial artery in his wrist, I felt his pulse stop completely, not skip a beat, not slow down, stop entirely. I looked at the cardiac monitor, which continued to show a normal rhythm with no interruption. I moved my fingers to different positions on his wrist, then checked his carotid pulse in his neck. Nothing. The monitor showed a heart rate of 92, but I couldn't feel any pulse whatsoever. I called Dr. Hartwell immediately. She came over and spent several minutes checking pulse points throughout his body. "This is impossible," she muttered. "The monitor shows perfect cardiac rhythm, but I can't feel a pulse anywhere." She ordered an immediate echocardiogram to visualize the heart's function directly. The ultrasound technician, Sarah Mitchell, arrived within 20 minutes and began the echocardiogram. What she showed us on the screen defied everything we understood about cardiac physiology. The patient's heart was beating visibly on the ultrasound. We could see all four chambers contracting and relaxing in perfect coordination. The heart muscle appeared strong and healthy, with excellent ejection fraction. Blood was clearly flowing through the chambers and vessels. Yet neither Dr. Hartwell nor I could feel even the slightest pulse at any point of his body. "I've been doing cardiac ultrasounds for 12 years, Sarah said quietly, "and I've never seen anything like this. His heart is working perfectly, but it's like the pulse waves aren't transmitting to his peripheral arteries. That's physiologically impossible." Dr. Hartwell decided to consult with cardiology. Dr. James Martinez, the on-call cardiologist, arrived at 2:15 a.m. and spent 45 minutes examining the patient. He reviewed all the test results, listened to the heart sounds, and repeated the pulse checks. His conclusion was that we were dealing with an extremely rare vascular condition that he'd never personally encountered, but had read about in medical literature. Something about altered arterial compliance that could theoretically dampen pulse transmission while maintaining adequate perfusion. But even Dr. Martinez admitted that the explanation didn't fully account for what we were observing. "The patient shows no signs of cardiovascular compromise," he said. "Normal blood pressure, normal cardiac output, normal tissue perfusion. If his pulse was truly absent, he'd be showing signs of shock or organ dysfunction. Instead, he appears completely stable." At 3 a.m., I was asked to transfer the patient to the cardiac monitoring unit for extended observation. As I prepared to move him from the emergency department bed to a transport gurney, He spoke to me for the first time in complete sentences. "You're trying to understand something that doesn't follow your rules," he said, his voice calm and clear. "You measure what you expect to find, but you don't know how to measure what's actually there." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him directly. His eyes were focused and alert, completely different from the disoriented state he'd been in for hours. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your instruments show you what they're designed to detect," he continued, "but they can't show you what exists outside their parameters. You're looking for explanations in a system that doesn't apply to me." Before I could respond, Dr. Hartwell approached with the transport team. The patient immediately returned to his previous, quiet, disoriented state, as if the conversation had never happened. I mentioned what he'd said to Dr. Hartwell, but she was focused on getting him to the cardiac unit and suggested that disoriented patients often have moments of clarity that don't necessarily indicate full recovery. The patient was transferred to the cardiac monitoring unit at 3:30 a.m., where he would remain under continuous observation. I completed my shift at 7 a.m., handed off to the day nurse, and went home expecting to hear updates about his condition when I returned for my next shift. When I arrived at work the following evening, I immediately checked on the patient's status. The day shift nurse, Patricia Wong, gave me an update that left me more confused than ever. "He was completely stable all day," she said. "Vital signs normal, cardiac monitor showing regular rhythm." But the night nurse from cardiac unit called around noon to say they were having the same pulse issue you reported. 3 different nurses and 2 physicians couldn't feel any pulse, but the monitors showed perfect cardiac function. More disturbing was what happened during the morning shift change. According to Patricia, the patient had been fully alert and oriented when the day team arrived, able to state the current date and location. But when asked about his identity or personal history, he'd given responses that didn't make sense. He claimed his name was Thomas Meridian, but when they asked for his social security number or address, he'd provided information that didn't exist in any database. The Social Security Administration had no record of the number he provided. The address he gave was a location in downtown Portland that had been demolished 15 years ago to build a parking structure. The strangest part, Patricia continued, was when Dr. Kumar asked him about his medical history. The patient described surgical procedures and medical conditions using terminology that was accurate but outdated, like he was describing modern medical procedures using language from 40 or 50 years ago. I spent the next hour reviewing his chart and the additional tests that had been ordered during the day shift. His blood work continued to show the same anomalous results. Perfect chemistry panels, impossibly low lactate levels, and something new that hadn't been present the night before. His complete blood count now showed a red blood cell morphology that the lab technician described as unusual but not pathological. The red cells appeared slightly larger than normal and had what the report called enhanced oxygen carrying capacity beyond normal physiological limits. At 9 p.m., I went to the cardiac unit to check on him personally. I found him sitting up in bed, alert and watching the cardiac monitor with what seemed like genuine interest. When he saw me, he smiled, the first emotional expression I'd seen from him. "You're the nurse who drew my blood yesterday," he said. "You're still trying to figure out what's wrong with me." "Are you feeling better?" I asked, checking the monitors and noting that his heart rate and blood pressure remained stable. "I feel the same as I always do," he replied. "But I'm curious about your technology. These machines that measure heartbeats and blood pressure, they're very sophisticated, but they're based on assumptions about how bodies work." I sat down next to his bed. "What do you mean by assumptions?" "You assume that everyone's cardiovascular system functions according to the same biological principles," he said. "You assume that heart muscle contractions create pressure waves that can be detected at pulse points. You assume that blood chemistry follows predictable patterns based on cellular metabolism and organ function." His words were unsettling, not because they were incoherent, but because they suggested a level of medical knowledge that seemed inconsistent with his initial presentation as a disoriented patient found in the woods. "Are you a medical professional?" I asked. "I understand biological system," he said, "but not in the way you've been trained to understand them. Your medical science is based on studying bodies that follow certain rules. But what happens when you encounter a body that follows different rules?" Before I could ask what he meant, his cardiac monitor began showing an arrhythmia. Not dangerous, but irregular enough to warrant attention. I looked at the screen, then at him and realized he was completely relaxed and showing no signs of distress despite the irregular rhythm displaying on the monitor. I checked his pulse manually and found something that made my blood run cold. Not only could I not feel a pulse, but when I pressed my stethoscope to his chest, I couldn't hear any heart sounds at all. Complete cardiac silence. Yet the monitor continued to show cardiac activity. His blood pressure remained stable, and he appeared perfectly comfortable. "This is impossible," I whispered. "Only according to the rules you know," he said quietly. "But there are other rules. Other ways that biological systems can function. You're trying to measure something that exists outside your scientific framework." I called Dr. Hartwell immediately. She arrived within 10 minutes and repeated all the cardiac assessments I just performed. Like me, she could hear no heart sounds and feel no pulse, while the monitors continued to show normal cardiac function. She ordered an immediate repeat echocardiogram and called for a cardiology consult. The echocardiogram results were even more bizarre than the previous night's study. The ultrasound showed what appeared to be normal cardiac structure, but the blood flow patterns were unlike anything the technician had seen. Instead of the typical pulsatile flow through the heart chambers, the blood appeared to be moving in a continuous, steady stream without the normal pressure variations that create the heartbeat rhythm. "It's like his cardiovascular system is operating on completely different principles," Dr. Hartwell told me privately. "The blood is circulating, oxygen is being delivered to tissues, but the mechanism isn't following normal cardiac physiology." Dr. Martinez returned for a second consultation and spent over an hour examining the patient and reviewing all the test results. His assessment was that we were dealing with a medical condition that had never been documented in the literature, something that challenged fundamental assumptions about human cardiovascular function. "I've been practicing cardiology for 28 years, he told us, and I've never seen anything that made me question basic physiological principles. But this patient's cardiovascular system appears to be functioning effectively without following the mechanical and electrical patterns we consider essential for life." At 11:30 p.m., I was asked to draw another set of blood samples for additional testing. As I prepared the blood draw equipment, the patient watched with that same detached interest he'd shown throughout his stay. When I inserted the needle into his vein, something happened that violated every principle of human physiology I'd learned. The blood that flowed into the collection tubes was the wrong color. Human blood, when drawn from a vein, should be dark red due to lower oxygen content. Arterial blood is bright red because it's oxygen rich, but venous blood is always darker. The blood flowing from this patient's vein was not just bright red. It was a color I'd never seen in any biological sample. It had an almost metallic quality, like liquid silver with a red tint. I stared at the collection tubes, then at the insertion site, then back at the tubes. The blood looked completely normal once it was in the tubes, the standard dark red color of venous blood. But I was certain of what I'd seen flowing from the needle, something that shouldn't exist in any human circulatory system. I showed the samples to Dr. Hartwell, who observed that they looked completely normal. When I described what I'd seen during the blood draw, she suggested that the unusual lighting in the cardiac unit might have created an optical illusion. But I knew what I'd observed, and it wasn't a trick of lighting. The lab results from this second blood draw showed the same pattern as before. Perfect chemistry, impossibly low lactate, and red blood cells with enhanced oxygen carrying capacity. But there was a new finding that the lab technician called unprecedented. The patient's blood showed no signs of cellular aging. Red blood cells typically live for about 120 days, and in any normal blood sample, you can identify cells at various stages of their life cycle. This patient's red blood cells all appeared to be at exactly the same stage of development, as if they'd all been created at the same time. Wednesday night passed, without incident, but Thursday brought developments that pushed the case beyond anything I could rationalize. I arrived for my shift to find that the patient had been moved to a private room with enhanced monitoring equipment. Dr. Hartwell met me as I clocked in and explained that they'd brought in specialists from OHSU to consult on the case. "We've got hematology, cardiology, pulmonology, and neurology all trying to make sense of his condition," she said. "Everyone agrees that his physiology is functioning perfectly, but no one can explain how it's functioning without following normal biological principles." The most disturbing development was that the patient had begun making statements that suggested impossible knowledge. According to the day shift nurse, he'd provided detailed information about other patients in the hospital, patients he'd never met and had no way of knowing about. He'd correctly identified that a patient in room 314 was suffering from undiagnosed pancreatic cancer, something that wasn't confirmed until later testing. He told the nursing staff that a patient in the pediatric unit would experience respiratory distress at approximately 3 p.m., which happened exactly as he predicted. When I entered his room that evening, I found him sitting in a chair by the window, looking out at the hospital parking lot. He turned to me with that same calm expression he'd maintained throughout his stay. "You've been thinking about my blood," he said before I could speak. "You saw something that doesn't fit your understanding of human physiology." I sat down across from him. "What are you?" "I'm exactly what you've been observing," he replied. "A body that functions according to different biological principles than the ones you've studied. Your medical science assumes that all human bodies operate according to the same biochemical and physiological rules. But that assumption isn't always correct." "That's impossible," I said. "Human physiology is based on fundamental biological principles that apply to everyone." "Is it?" he asked. "Or is your medical science based on studying the most common biological patterns? What happens when you encounter a pattern that exists outside your database of normal human function?" Over the next 2 hours, he explained things that challenged everything I thought I knew about medicine and biology. He described his cardiovascular system as operating on principles that involve direct cellular oxygenation without requiring mechanical heart pumps to create pressure-driven blood flow. He explained that his metabolism functioned at levels of efficiency that eliminated most cellular waste products, which was why his lactate levels were so low. He described his blood cells as being designed for optimal oxygen transport and cellular repair, which was why they all appeared to be the same age. The most unsettling part was when he demonstrated abilities that couldn't be explained by any medical science. He placed his hand on his chest and somehow altered his cardiac rhythm at will, making the monitor show different patterns while maintaining his calm demeanor. He controlled his blood pressure, raising and lowering it in precise increments just by concentrating. He showed me how he could stop his heart entirely for over a minute while remaining conscious and alert, then restart it with perfect rhythm. "Your instruments are measuring real physiological functions," he said after demonstrating complete cardiac arrest while remaining conversational. "But they're not measuring the mechanisms you think they're measuring. Your science assumes that consciousness requires continuous brain oxygenation, that brain oxygenation requires continuous cardiac function, and that cardiac function requires mechanical heart muscle contractions. Those assumptions work for most human bodies, but not for all of them." Friday morning brought a development that convinced me I was dealing with something beyond the scope of medical science. Dr. Hartwell called me into her office before my shift began and showed me the results of a comprehensive genetic analysis that had been ordered by the consulting specialists. "His DNA is human," she said, "but it contains genetic sequences that don't exist in any known human genome database. The geneticist from OHSU says it's like he has additional genetic material that codes for biological functions we don't understand." The genetic analysis showed that the patient possessed gene sequences that appeared to code for enhanced cardiovascular efficiency, accelerated cellular repair mechanisms, and metabolic pathways that produced minimal cellular waste. The geneticist had described the findings as evolutionarily impossible, genetic adaptations that would require millions of years of selective pressure to develop, but which appeared in combination with normal human genetic markers. "The strangest part," Dr. Hartwell continued, "is that when they ran his genetic profile through law enforcement databases, they found partial matches to DNA samples from unsolved cases dating back 30 years. Not exact matches, but genetic similarities that suggest family relationships." That evening, I found the patient reading medical textbooks from the hospital's reference library. He looked up as I entered his room and smiled. "I've been learning about your medical science," he said. "It's very impressive what you've accomplished by studying biological patterns and developing treatments based on statistical analysis of large populations. But it's limited by its assumptions about what constitutes normal human function." "Where are you from?" I asked directly. "I'm from here," he replied. "I've always been here. but I'm part of a population that your medical science doesn't account for because we don't follow the biological patterns your research is based on. Are there others like you? There have always been others like me, he said. We don't typically end up in hospitals because our biological systems are more efficient and less prone to the dysfunction that brings most people to emergency departments. But occasionally, circumstances arise that result in contact with your medical system. He explained that he'd been found in Powell Butte Nature Preserve because he'd been attempting to help someone who had become lost in the woods. In the process of providing assistance, he'd expended more energy than his system could immediately replenish, resulting in the temporary disorientation that led to his hospitalization. The hikers who found you said you were unconscious, I pointed out. Not unconscious in the way you understand it, he said. My system was redirecting energy resources to essential functions, while my consciousness operated at a reduced level. It's similar to what you might call sleep, but it serves different biological purposes. Saturday brought the final developments that led to my decision to leave emergency nursing. I arrived at work to find that 2 more patients with similar anomalies had been admitted during the previous week, one to the cardiac unit and one to the pulmonary unit. Both presented with impossible physiological findings that defied medical explanation. The cardiac patient was a woman in her 40s who had been brought in after collapsing at work. Like our original patient, she showed no detectable pulse while maintaining normal blood pressure in cardiac monitor readings. Her blood work showed the same perfect chemistry and impossibly low lactate levels. The pulmonary patient was a man in his 50s who had been found unconscious in his apartment by concerned neighbors. His lung function test showed oxygen extraction rates that exceeded normal human limits, and his breathing patterns didn't correlate with the normal neurological controls for respiration. All 3 patients shared the same genetic anomalies, DNA that was recognizably human, but contained additional sequences that coded for enhanced biological functions. All 3 had been found unconscious in situations that suggested they had been trying to help other people. And all 3 made statements that demonstrated impossible knowledge about other patients in hospital operations. Dr. Hartwell called a meeting with all the consulting specialists to discuss the implications of these cases. The consensus was that we were dealing with a previously unknown human population with significantly enhanced physiological capabilities. The geneticists suggested that these individuals might represent an undocumented evolutionary development, possibly isolated populations that had developed extreme biological adaptations to environmental pressures. But the explanation that made the most sense to the consulting team also made the least sense from a scientific standpoint. The evidence suggested that these patients belonged to a human subpopulation with biological capabilities that bordered on the medically impossible, enhanced cardiovascular efficiency, optimized metabolism, advanced cellular repair mechanisms, and neurological functions that allowed conscious control over autonomic processes. Sunday morning, I came to work to find that all 3 patients had disappeared. Not discharged, not transferred, not signed out against medical advice. They were simply gone. Their hospital rooms were empty, their medical equipment was undisturbed, and there was no record of anyone entering or leaving their rooms during the night shift. The security footage from the hallways showed no movement in or out of their rooms between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m., but when the day shift arrived, the patients were no longer there. Hospital administration launched an investigation, but no evidence was ever found to explain what had happened. The patient's medical records remained in our system, documenting impossible physiological findings and test results that challenge fundamental medical principles. But the patients themselves had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions that no one could answer. I submitted my resignation that afternoon. I'd spent 15 years in emergency medicine, confident that modern medical science could explain and treat virtually any condition I might encounter. I'd believed that human physiology followed predictable biological rules, that diagnostic technology could measure and quantify any bodily function, and that medical knowledge was comprehensive enough to address the full spectrum of human health and disease. But 3 patients had shattered those assumptions completely. They demonstrated biological capabilities that shouldn't exist, genetic profiles that defied evolutionary science, and physiological functions that operated outside the principles I'd studied for my entire career. They'd shown me that human biology might be far more variable and mysterious than our medical science accounts for. The case cases forced me to question not just what I knew about medicine, but what medical science knows about the full range of human biological possibility. How many other patients have presented with findings that couldn't be explained by standard medical knowledge? How many unusual cases have been dismissed as measurement errors, equipment malfunctions, or statistical anomalies because they didn't fit our understanding of normal human function? I think about those 3 patients every day. I wonder if they return to whatever population they came from, if they continue to live among us undetected, or if they represent something about human biology that our medical science isn't equipped to understand. I wonder how many times emergency departments have encountered similar cases without recognizing what they were seeing. Most of all, I wonder what else we don't know about the human body and whether our medical knowledge is as comprehensive as we believe it to be. Because sometimes the most frightening realization isn't that there are things we can't cure, it's that there are things we can't even explain.